I'd now like to welcome our next speaker, Liz Marsland.
As educators, we're missing the vital so what factor to motivate students. What if there is a way to turn this dream of engaged students into reality? I believe there is, and it is the approach of phenomenon-based learning. In phenomenon-based learning, a real-life context or phenomenon works as a starting point. Students are inspired by this real-life or real-world problem that does not have an easy black and white answer and instead has multiple solutions. The processes that students undertake to evaluate these solutions better reflect the complexities of real life in the business world. Phenomenon-based learning was developed in Finland in 2016, a country that is known for excellence in education. Students are led to create connections in their learning to the broader world around them, stimulating natural curiosity. When I shifted my practice to this teaching approach, I suddenly saw students who were intrinsically interested and actively engaged in my classes, gaining new understandings and applying these in ways that can actually make a difference. So what is a phenomenon? It is a contemporary context used as a setting to foster multidisciplinary thought that allows problem solving and real-world learning to occur. It is authentic, driven by that problem, inspiring deep inquiry and genuine creativity. From an accounting and finance perspective, a phenomenon could be, how will COVID-19 impact the airline industry? From an economics perspective, a phenomenon could be, how will COVID-19 impact the way that our economies function? This could explore business cycles and trade and consider who benefits and who doesn't. The use of a phenomenon provides scaffolding or a framework so that students can determine how to apply content to authentic settings. Phenomenon-based learning is ideal for real-world scenarios because it takes a multidisciplinary approach to problems that are, in fact, multidisciplinary. The traditional way to teach accounting is to simultaneously introduce several concepts, such as assets, liabilities, equity, revenues, expenses, as well as financial statements. The traditional approach can be quite a battle for some students because they can be intimidated by the extent of terminology, nothing seems familiar, and often they're not sure even where to start. Instead, with phenomenon-based learning, we introduce content knowledge as needed to support students' inquiry and provide the vital so what factor. With an example, such as the impact of COVID-19 on the airline industry, we can break this down into meaningful stages to consider, how does COVID-19 impact funding, profit, and sustainability? Even better, the use of phenomenon-based learning develops many 21st century skills that renowned educational consultant Dr. Michael Fullan outlines as essential, including collaboration, communication, creativity, and critical thinking. So that sounds like a great theory, but how does it work in practice? I've taught in several university classes using this teaching approach. I was really surprised by the results. I teach accounting, which is not everyone's favourite subject. Who would have thought? And even worse, sometimes perceived as boring, complex, and overwhelming for non-accounting students. Previously, some students couldn't see the relevance to their business learning if they didn't want to be an accountant. For educators, teaching in silos or single disciplines is a big mistake. Remember, real-world problems typically don't involve one discipline, such as accounting. Instead, real-world problems involve multiple disciplines, such as accounting, ethics, and finance. We aren't preparing students adequately if we just inform them, rather than giving them the skills to embrace knowledge and show how to apply it to real-world scenarios. What are the challenges when implementing phenomenon-based learning? I had to be willing to completely throw away the traditional approach that I had to teaching, and likewise the traditional textbooks. The traditional approach is to deliver content without a context. Instead, in phenomenon-based learning, in every lesson we must establish, how does the content relate to the phenomenon? As an example, learning about assets in isolation isn't particularly useful or relevant, but learning how to approach funding assets during COVID-19 ties the content to the phenomenon and students see and understand the application. Phenomenon-based learning has many benefits because it presents the content in meaningful chunks, demonstrates how the content relates to the real world, fosters greater student engagement, deepens students' learning because students make connections and see practical relevance, improves students' 21st century skills, as highlighted earlier, and finally, encourages students' independence, and this helps to create a more self-sufficient workforce. What did I learn from teaching a phenomenon-based class? I found the use of a phenomenon is a key tool to actively engage students, as they're naturally curious to explore different aspects and ask, so what, and how does this really relate? I observed students more open to new ideas, taking risks, and importantly, willing to step out of their comfort zone. The thread of a phenomenon or narrative woven through the accounting concepts gave students real connection and buy-in. I was amazed by significantly increased student collaboration, communication, and critical thinking. The light bulb moment for me was when my inbox became flooded with student notifications about the chosen phenomenon. The students were discussing relevant media articles that they had discovered and were discussing these together actively outside the classroom. This was revelation to me, as I had never seen such previously enthusiastic students. Learning became an interaction between the content, the students, and me, the teacher. The classroom environment shifted from teacher-led to student-led as they shared their own experiences and thoughts. One such example was when students reflected on their own significantly reduced business travel during COVID-19. They began to analyse how the airline industry will change with reduced business travel as a result of increased use of products such as Zoom. The classroom dynamic significantly changed. The expert versus novice dynamic disappeared. How exciting for me as an educator to create a setting where my students just pick up the script and run with it. Suddenly, my content had become alive. All I needed to do was provide the environment for learning to occur. The research shows storytelling is a powerful teaching strategy, creating connections and drawing in learners. I can see real value, particularly in a dry, numerical and complex subject matter such as accounting, to bring in that real-world application. The context and stories become far more engaging. Miraculously, accounting becomes fun and engaging. How can this be, you might ask? And I've got 3 observations to share. Firstly, the use of a phenomenon acts as a hook to grab the student's attention and give them a boost of confidence. From the very first class, students were participating actively because while they may not have known much about accounting, they knew something about the airline industry and COVID-19. Secondly, the use of a phenomenon acts as a consistent thread woven through each and every class, so students can look forward to what happens next, and this helps to transition into more complex material. And finally, the use of a phenomenon reminds students just how important it is to take a step back and look at the big picture. What are the challenges in the learning process? It is important to consider flow-on effects when a change in teaching model is made. Our learning intentions need to remain clear, and academic rigour must be maintained. Leading educational researcher Dr. Basil Bernstein reminds us we must align curriculum, learning and teaching strategies and assessment to make phenomenon-based learning effective. Adjustments will need to occur in all three areas to make phenomenon-based learning effective, including for curriculum, to create learning goals through the process rather than rigidly imposing them. For strategies, to ensure students' resources and support are available. And for assessment, to accept there isn't going to be one black and white solution and allow for the added complexity. Educators may be worried about the increased workload. My experience is that teaching and assessment materials can be adapted relatively easily to new teaching periods. All that needs to be done is to identify the new phenomenon to use for that teaching period, enabling a fresh perspective but based on a similar content structure. The students do the heavy lifting as they are engaging with the topic deeply, so the educator doesn't have to suffer a vastly increased workload. What are the factors that enable phenomenon-based learning to succeed? Firstly, the choice of a phenomenon is critical, ideally involving a contemporary topic, such as COVID-19 or Brexit. Secondly, teachers familiar with interrelated disciplines, such as accounting and finance, are important to ensure that we can tell students the whole story. Some MBA student feedback highlights the importance of this teaching approach from a student perspective. Using relevant phenomena such as industry disruption and emerging technologies, I saw phenomenon-based learning as the bridge to take me from being a leader for today to becoming a leader for the future. I personally see numerous benefits in taking students from familiar to unfamiliar in scaffolded steps. Phenomenon-based learning is key to active and deep learning. Instead of just informing students' minds with traditional teaching techniques, phenomenon-based learning educates students, including the phenomenon, to get to both their hearts and minds. What can you put into action in the future? Whenever you are teaching or coaching, ask, what phenomenon can I use now to turn learning into action and make the learning come alive? Phenomenon-based learning can transform the classroom into something phenomenal. Thank you.